Well, hello and welcome to the New Book of Daniel podcast. My name is Daniel Bobinski. I'll be your host on this adventure as we journey into some of the news that's happening out there and looking at it from a patriot perspective. Stuff that you're not going to hear on the, shall we say, the network news or the cable networks or even your local TV folks, nor your local newspapers. My job in life is to focus on things that are true. And so, anyways, there's lots of things to talk about. I pulled some stuff off of my news feed and various sites that I visit. And I wanted to tell you, by the way, that if you ever come across a story that you think I should cover on any one of my podcasts, or maybe something that I should write about over at uncoverdc.com or at Red State, or talk about when I guest host the Alan Key Show, send it to me. You can contact me via any of my social media platforms. You can find me on Facebook, which is New Book of Daniel, facebook.com/New Book of Daniel. I'm on Gab, same thing, New Book of Daniel. MeWe, same thing. Twitter decided that I wasn't worthy of their platform anymore, so they kicked me off. I guess that was just too much truth for them to handle. But if you wanted me to contact to repeat any kind of story that you have for me, feel free to contact me. Happy to do it. Again, my name is Daniel Bobinski. You are listening to the New Book of Daniel podcast, and this is for February 24th. And because it's after that time over on the East Coast, and I'm wanting to start with something that's happening here in Idaho. We have Idaho is a very conservative state. People move here, they say it's a red state. And, the voters are certainly conservative, but the people who run for office aren't necessarily that way. And they have learned that if you want to get elected in the state, you pretty much have to have an R after your name. So we get people who are, shall I say, Democrats or very liberal Republicans, and they put the R after the name and they get elected because a lot of folks just don't want the policies from Seattle or California or New York or places like that. So one of the things I like about Idaho, and I've been here now for 23 years, is they kind of stay out of your business. They tend to leave you alone, which I kind of like. I was born and raised in Chicago, which is, Democrat Central. And then I joined the Navy, which took me to San Diego. And then when I got out of the Navy, I stayed in San Diego for an extra 10 years. And you needed a license there to do just about anything. It was kind of crazy. You need a license. I used to joke, you need a license to breathe. You need a license to spit in California. When I moved to Idaho 23 years ago, I went down to the county clerk to get a business license because I figured that's what you do. And they said to me, well, is it for food or for children? And I said, neither. And they said, well, then you don't need a license. And I kind of had to pick my jaw up off the floor. What do you mean I don't need a license? He goes, if you're not dealing with food, if you're not dealing with children, then you don't need a license. Just go hang up your shingle, open up your business. It's like, whoa. I kind of like that. And actually, it's still that way here today. So if you are looking for a little bit of, shall we say, freedom, we could use you here in Idaho because we have some people in our state who, like I said, they have maybe D's after their names, but they look like an R. And when you have that, you tend to get some pretty crazy legislation going through the House. And our legislature is in session. Well, there is this situation where we had these things. Maybe you heard of this COVID thing and these mask mandates. Well, Idaho is a state that tends to stay, like I say, out of your business. And yet our governor, he fell into one of the three Bs. He was either bribed, he was bullied, or he was blackmailed. But he, I think, succumbed to the $1.25 billion that came into the state from the CARES money. And actually, we were looking at the controller's records from the state controller. Actually, $8.1 billion has come into Idaho alone. Those of you with larger states, smaller states, you probably have even more money coming in. But, when you're a governor and you get like $8 billion, you can buy a lot of friends and influence a lot of people with that. you can make a lot of friends. And last night, I was at a meeting with where the House Majority Leader was the guest speaker, talked with him afterwards. And his phrase, his term for what happened to all that money, because they don't know, he says the governor laundered it. That was his term. And I believe that, and I said, well, how do we find out where he spent all that money? And his response was, we'd like to know the same answer. So anyways, we do have lots of what looks like corruption. I can't just make the accusation. I don't have the hard facts, but it sure looks like it. Like I said, buying a lot of friends, influencing a lot of people with all that money. Well, the governor is wise. He's coached by a very liberal attorney general in our state. And he delegated all of these things to different people so that he couldn't get the blame for it. So when people yell at him for mask mandates, he goes, hey, I didn't make that mandate. The health department did. And the health department actually delegated it down to the district health. Idaho is divided up into 6 different health districts. And our local district, I listened. They stopped their open meetings, so you couldn't have open meetings where you could go sit in and listen. You had to watch it over Zoom on their YouTube broadcast, which was kind of like, sitting there handcuffed and mugged and with duct tape over your mouth as you're listening to them lie about you and pronounce a sentence upon you, which is what it really felt like. They had these doctors who were the chief medical officers for the various hospitals. I'm just going to say the word lying about what the situation was. We're not supposed to say the word lying. So they were presenting lots of mistruths. How's that? And I'm screaming at the computer monitor as these guys are producing no scientific evidence. And then all of a sudden it's everybody on the Central District Health Board is, whoa, we have to have these masks to protect people. And it was based on zero scientific evidence, all anecdotal stories. Nobody was being heard. People were going to the Central District Health meeting. They wouldn't let them in. They wouldn't let their voices be heard. You could email a question, but there was no guarantee at all that they would address it. And I'll guarantee you they didn't, because I know of lots of people who emailed questions in that were never addressed. So what happened? We had some people, 3 people, count them, 1, 2, 3, went to one of the houses of the largest proponent for masks and on the Central District Health. And they stood outside of her house during the meeting, thinking that she was inside doing the remote meeting from her house. Turns out she was at a different place of business. They thought she was at her house. And so they had an air horn, and someone brought one of these 5-gallon buckets from Home Depot, and they stood outside. One person filmed, the other person pounded on the 5-gallon bucket, the other person pressed the air horn. They were trying to upset the call for more mandatory masks with fines, as if they had the legislative authority to do that. Well, like I said, they thought she was home. She wasn't. And so she gets a text from one of her neighbors that says, hey, there's protesters outside your house. And so she interrupts the meeting and she says, I gotta call my son. He's home alone. He's 12 years old. And they're outside pounding on the door. Or they're outside the door pounding. That's what she said. They're outside the door pounding, quote unquote. So what's the implication? The implication is that there's people pounding on her door and her 12-year-old is home alone. That's the background. So they have now this Mr. Greg Cheney is the chair of the House Judiciary Rules Committee here in Idaho. He and a Democrat created some legislation that you can't go in front of somebody's house and target picket. It's illegal, according to this new legislation. It's not been passed yet. But if it does pass, it will be illegal to stand in front of somebody's house who's an elected official, or anybody for that matter, and picket in front of their house, even though it's a public sidewalk. And you have paid for that public sidewalk, and it's their right of way. And they're saying you can't do it. So the Mr. Greg Cheney, the guy who co-sponsored this legislation, he's been in my stories before. This guy really is in my opinion, a Democrat with an R after his name. And I think he's carrying a lot of water for the governor. I think personally, on a personal level, I think Mr. Greg Cheney in Idaho is carrying the water for the governor, because I think the governor has said, look, if you carry all this water for me, I'll make you the attorney general, because this guy is an attorney and he's a suck up in the biggest sense of the word. Anyways, Brooke Green is a Democrat, Greg Cheney is a Republican, and they put it for this legislation. Well, during the testimony, the presentation, Greg Cheney says that these are Nazis and brown shirts standing in front of these elected officials' homes, causing chaos and intimidating people that they can't come out of their homes, keeping them captive in their homes. Can you imagine calling your constituents Nazis and brown shirts? These are people who went to Diana Lacciando's home. I'll mention her name. She was the star on the Central District Health who would not relent. She insisted on masks and fines. They just wanted to be heard. They wanted to be heard. There's some things that I know that I can't share, but some of these people who went there have reasons to not wear masks. But I'm not allowed to talk about that, so I won't. I gave them my word that I wouldn't. So anyways, my point being, they weren't being heard. They were frustrated. No way to get their concerns met. No way to get a voice. No way to have representative government at all. These are just committees that make unilateral decisions on how things are going to happen. No input from the public whatsoever. No testimony. So they put forth this legislation. And so a friend of mine, who's a strong patriot, she wrote Brooke Green, who was the co-author on the bill. And she broke down, in fact, she's been a servant of the Constitution for a long time, and her dad served and all this stuff, and how this is an unconstitutional mess. Those three people, by the way, got arrested for disturbing the peace, even though one of them was just holding a camera, a phone, recording it. She got arrested for disturbing the peace. Go figure. So here's the response. I want to read you some of this, not the whole thing, but some of it, from this Representative Green, who is the co-author of this, shall we say, ironically, what I would consider to be Nazi legislation. Thanks so much for contacting me and your valuable input and personal experience. Our democracy relies on freedom of expression and an open, productive civil discourse. Yeah, I would agree with that. But it wasn't happening. Central District Health wasn't listening to a darn thing. Setting policy based on who can act most intimidating is anti-democratic and anti-American. Sadly, the past year has seen a dramatic increase in the instances of protesting, crossing lines, and engaging in intimidation tactics to make their point. Examples this past year alone abound, with impropriety from an Ada County commissioner being forced to leave her office to comfort her 12-year-old son when an angry mob descended upon her home. Really? An angry mob? I will put the, it's crazy. Let me do this. I just happen to have a link to the video of this quote unquote angry mob that I just put in the chat. And I will put it in the show notes for this video for people who are watching it after the fact. Now, I have to tell you, I personally don't agree with standing outside in front of somebody's house and making a bunch of noise. Air horns, beating on drums, not my gig. I disagree with that. They were cited with disturbing the peace. I think the two guys that made all the noise, maybe that's appropriate. But they're now making it to where it's illegal to even walk up and down the sidewalk and picket in front of somebody's house. That has been a mainstay in this country for over 200 years. And my personal response is, what happened to tar and feathering? Be glad, Mr. Cheney and Ms. Green, that they don't tar and feather anymore. But this is misrepresentation. It's just a sleight of words. Here's this person who is co-authoring this and co-sponsoring this legislation who says an angry mob descended. You can go watch the video, hopefully after this one. And you'll see there's not an angry mob. At no time do they step on the person's property. At no time do they go pound on Commissioner Laciando's front door. Yet that's what was reported in the media, because Laciando said that they were outside her door pounding. Well, I suppose technically that's correct. They were outside of the door on the public sidewalk, pounding on a 5-gallon bucket from Home Depot. So yeah, I guess they were outside the door pounding. But were they standing on the front porch pounding on the door, which is what the media implied and actually stated in some case? And then you had the Boise mayor, get this, the Boise mayor, whose middle name could be Marxist, said, "We will hunt you down." Sounds kind of like a threat of violence, if you ask me. We're going to hunt somebody down. Kind of crazy. This is not protest, she says. This is an intimidation. Making one's point does not require holding civil servants captive in their homes while instilling fear in them and their families. Nobody was holding anybody captive in their home. Nobody. Representative Green, I don't want to call you a liar, but you certainly are stretching the truth. No, there was no angry mob. Nobody was holding anybody captive in their home. And yes, intimidation can be a form of the democratic expression, because Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and AOC and Nancy Pelosi were all talking about how this imitation, these riots that happened last summer were definitely a form of democratic expression. And yet, when conservatives do it, suddenly it's not. It's mob rule? No, mob rule is when you guys serving in the legislature do not listen to the people who you are elected to represent. That's mob rule. When you just unilaterally make decisions and don't listen to the input of constituents. Anyways, that's why we came together to introduce bipartisan legislation to draw a distinction between protest and vigilantism. That's a pretty strong word there, Representative Green. Anyways, here's what we're doing. I'll wrap up this story with this. Here's what we're thinking about doing. Because, like I said, Chairman Cheney, chairman of the Judiciary Rules Committee, said that these people who protest on your sidewalks are equivalent to Nazis in brown shirts. So we're thinking about having a watch party and even televising it with, we're going to have bingo cards perhaps, because there are 70 people in the legislature. We're going to find out who votes yes on this. Who, in other words, agrees that their constituents are Nazis in brown shirts? Because anybody who votes yes on this piece of legislation will be considered, in my opinion, a Nazi. So we're thinking about having bingo cards made up with all the numbers corresponding to the different representatives in alphabetical order. And if that legislature votes yes to pass this particular legislation, then that person can stamp their bingo card if they have that number. And if they vote no, then that number, and we'll see who wins the Nazi legislature bingo. And we're going to definitely publicize that and let everybody know who thinks the constituents that want to stand up for their rights and have their voices be heard are Nazis and brown shirts. Speaking of Nazis and brown shirts, next story. Let's move on to this January 6th thing. It's still hanging around our necks. Ex-Capitol Police Chief, I think this is from NOQ report, ex-Capitol Police Chief had intel that Antifa would be at the Capitol riots. This is the chief of police for the Capitol saying, we had intel. We knew they were going to be there. Lots of intel. And yet the mainstream media says, well, that's been debunked. That didn't happen. And yet here's the chief of police testifying, yes, we did. Why would social media be so adamant that that's false? On testimony on Capitol Hill today, former police chief acknowledged that Antifa was not only there, but that the police had intel beforehand that Antifa was coming. His statement sent to Congress said the assessment indicates that members of the Proud Boys, white supremacist groups, Antifa, and other left-wing extremist groups were expected to participate in January 6th event and that they may incline to become violent. Yeah. Strong speculation this was not a spontaneous event sparked by President Trump's speech. People had supplies beforehand. You don't show up at a rally with all of the protective gear and assembled alleged bombs and all of the things that they brought with them if it's just spontaneous, instigated by President Trump. These things were planned. We know this. I wrote a column on this over at Uncover DC, by the way. The false flag of January 6th. I forget the actual name of the column, but if you go to uncoverdc.com and you do a search for false flag, you will find my column on it for January 6th. In that article, which was very well received because it laid out in timeline what happened, this guy named John Sullivan went out there. He's a Antifa guy, a BLM guy, and he videotaped himself going into the Capitol, and all the incriminating evidence is right there. So no, I don't think any kind of hidden stuff there. It's all right there in video format. I recommend you read that article. Speaking of reading, I was reading about all the up and coming rebellion that's starting to happen. And this is a we will not comply kind of stuff. Third story, Burbank City Council votes to close the city's oldest bar because of COVID, because they're open. And Burbank, California doesn't want them to be open. And yet they're staying open. And their response is, we're not going to comply. Go for it. COVID restrictions are killing businesses and still not doing much to slow the spread. One business is refusing to comply despite an order from city council. They're calling it a dystopian near future. Yeah, it's called the Tin Horn Flats Bar and Grill, oldest bar in Burbank, California. And the owner says, I will not comply. I will not close my business to these pathetic un-American socialist cowards. If need be, I will go down with my ship. Amen to that. Amen to that. I just wrote a column. Don't know where it's going to get published yet. Haven't decided where it's going to go. But I talked about the fact that we are in a civil war. We are in a very civil war. It's a war. It's just being conducted very civilly with very aggressive passive aggression. That's what my term for it. Aggressive, passive aggressive behavior. And it's not just relegated to the Democrats, by the way. We got a lot of people with an R after their name that are doing it too. One of the things that we need to do that I state in that particular column is to not comply. Just do what you need to do. These are not lawful orders. These are not constitutional orders. And my example that I gave was this 77-year-old barber in the state of Michigan. This guy said, you know what? I have to stay open. I have to earn money. And he went back and opened up shop. And of course, the police came and gave him a citation, which he ignored. Next day, he came back and he's continuing to cut hair. And they gave him another citation. City then revoked his license. He said, fine. And he went back and cut hair. So when they put out the order to arrest him, a bunch of patriots showed up and surrounded his business so that the sheriffs couldn't come in. And the sheriff said, you know what? We're not going to do this. This is not a lawful order. We are sworn to basically to protect lawful, constitutionally issued orders from the legislature. The executive branch, I'm summarizing here, the executive branch doesn't have authority to create laws. So we're not doing anything. And so what happened? It went to court, and this barber, Mr. Mank or Mr. Mankey, I forget how you pronounce his name, Supreme Court let him off. Said all these orders that they were trying to put on you were unconstitutional. And this is what we are up against. First things first, we need to realize that we are in a war. We've got to wake up to that fact. We are in a war. We got to stop playing nice. That doesn't mean be mean. It just means don't worry about being nice. Instead, we have to be good. And that means standing up for constitutional principles. We don't have to be polite about it. Of course, it helps, but don't get distracted. Don't let them say, well, you're not being nice. The left knows that patriots are basically wired to be polite and they want to be nice. Don't worry about it. If Nancy Pelosi said something that was rude and obnoxious and unbelievably illogical, and someone were to say, Nancy, you're not being nice here, she would say, I'm not paid to be nice. She would say, if you don't like it, get thicker skin. That would be her gig. Leftists don't care. Marxists don't care about being nice. They just use that as a distraction. So don't worry about being nice. And we need to stop buying into the idea that they can cancel us. We got to stop then also feeding the socialist economy, because we're basically giving money to them for their ability to use it against us and cancel us. So think about this. If we were at war with Germany, would we go start buying ball bearings for our machine guns and things like that from Germany? No. We wouldn't buy from people who are at war against us. And the Marxists are definitely against us. That's what we're fighting here. So why should we give money to these companies that are trying to destroy us and cancel us? So I'm going to be writing another column that has to do with what we need to do. And one of those things is we need to build up our own new economy. And I'll be talking about this more in the future. But, how banks are being very selective now about who they will process payments for. You got people saying, well, we're not going to process payments for these gun manufacturers, these ammunition manufacturers, or for Donald Trump or other conservative. We're going to stop processing your payments. Okay, fine. There's a company that I just became aware of that is going to say, you know what? We're processing all payments. Come on down. No matter what. I'll be reporting more on that in the near future. You've got Gab, right? I mean, right now I'm broadcasting on YouTube, but who knows how long that's going to be. I put these posts up on Facebook, but who knows how long I'll be there until they decide to kick me out like Twitter did. But you've got Gab, which is owned by a Christian man who saw the writing on the wall early because they tried to cancel him out a couple of years ago. And he spent a lot of his money, personal money, to invest in servers. So they can't take him down like Amazon did to Parler. Relying too much, I mean, Amazon, very leftist company, very social justice in his mindset. I have purposely decided not to shop at Amazon as much as possible, that I can shop local and find patriot-run businesses as much as possible. Will it cost me more? Yes. Is it more inconvenient? Absolutely. But why should I give money and business to the people who are trying to cancel me and shut my mouth up when I'm trying to speak constitutional things? These aren't Daniel Bobinski things. I'm trying to purport that this is a constitutional government that's being shut down and taken over by Marxists. And they're trying to shut me up for saying that. It's not my ideas. I'm reporting what I observe. So anyways, then you got Mr. Dinesh D'Souza, who said, you know what, there's enough people out there wanting to get college degrees that don't want to go through all the social justice training. We've got an organization here in Idaho called the Idaho Freedom Foundation. They just completed 2 studies. One study at Boise State University. That's already been, and their next one will be Idaho State University. We have 3 major universities in the state here. And they did a study on how much social justice training, indoctrination, a student is required to have in order to graduate. I'll just give you a tidbit of this. At Boise State, any student, no matter what your degree, if it's underwater basket weaving all the way up to rocket science, anything in between, you must complete 4 classes on social justice topics. But you are not required to take any classes in American history. You're not required to take any classes on the Constitution. Nothing whatsoever. If you want to, you can go to Idaho Freedom Foundation's website, and I don't have it handy, but maybe I'll put it in the show notes, with a link to the study that they did, and you can read for yourself how much social justice training is getting put out by the universities, brainwashing our kids. Well, if you're like me, you don't want to spend your money on those kind of classes, but yet they make them mandatory. So Dinesh D'Souza has decided, why not offer a Harvard grade class, a Harvard type degree, high level, high quality stuff online? Look what we're doing now. we're using a camera, we're online, we can do stuff like this, Zoom. I mean, the one thing that this COVID thing did is teach people to get online and watch things and see things with a video camera. A lot of classes that I teach now are online when I'm with some of my clients. So it makes it, I don't have to travel. I like that. And D'Souza's saying this would cost me $5,000 a year, which is darn cheap for a good quality education, and 0 social justice class requirement. In fact, there won't be any social justice class training there at all. So one of the things we need to do as a society is rebuild our economy to a patriot economy and start doing business with these particular companies and not doing business with the social justice warrior companies. They are un-American, they are socialists, they are cowards. Speaking of businesses that are a little bit on the social justice side of things, and maybe you heard in the news the Coca-Cola woke ideology stuff that you needed to be less white. Coke had some training that was actually created by a gal by the name of Robin DiAngelo, who wrote the book White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. And she's got this training, and she wants people who are white to try to be less white. And I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but I was raised in Chicago, and I've been to the South Side, and I can be less white. But most people look at me when I'm trying to be less white, and they go, "You're basically doing cultural appropriation from the South Side, dude. Don't be doing that." So, anyways, this just got basted all over the news today. And so an internal whistleblower let some people know. In fact, maybe you've heard of Karlin Borisenko. I've had her on as a guest on my podcast multiple times. Karlin and I are friends. She is one of the keep people in the walk away movement. She made the news because she was a Democrat for 20 years. And she did the walk away. I would encourage you to go back and listen to her testimony. Just you can go back through the New Book of Daniel podcast on YouTube and find my interviews with her. But someone contacted her and said, this is going on. So apparently she tweeted something out, and it has over 500,000 retweets. And BBC World Service, the British broadcasting company, contacted her. And the reporter said that he wanted to interview her about this be less white training. So she took the interview, and she tweeted this, or she put it on her locals. And she said, then midway through the interview, the reporter started going on this tirade about how storming the Capitol was all about white supremacy, and stopped interviewing her and started lecturing her. And she hung up on the guy. I thought that was kind of funny. Interestingly, Karlin suggests to not boycott Coke. She says, this is not Coke's fault. This is Robin DiAngelo's fault. I've got some questions about that. I mean, someone at Coke made a decision to bring Robin DiAngelo in. Again, Robin DiAngelo being the author of White Fragility and Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. And I should also tell you that Karlin said, because this book was all the buzz here last year, and Karlin decided she was going to read the book and then do video commentary on it, which she did. It was kind of hilarious, but she mocked it mercilessly because basically you've got this Robin DiAngelo who's got a lot of guilt for having racist thoughts. And so she wrote a book about it. And suddenly all the social justice people think that she needs to develop training, which she's done, and they're paying her these big training dollar fees. And I guess LinkedIn had her training on their site, because LinkedIn has their own LinkedIn University. And I guess after all this hoopla, LinkedIn took down Robin DiAngelo's training. So I saw a funny meme earlier today. It said it was a little baby. You've seen the picture of that kid looking at you kind of like this. I don't know how to be less white, but I do know how to drink less Coke. So it's kind of funny. So I posted some stuff along these lines. And on my Facebook page, one of my friends, who happens to be a doctor, posted something, and I want to share it with you. He says, I have a neat little account of two toddlers, one who has white privilege and one who does not. The one with white privilege I saw because of a severe facial cellulitis and abscess due to his teeth being rotten. His mother just got custody 6 months ago when his dad went to prison. He's 4 years old and did not speak. He did not even cry when being stuck by IV starts and blood draws. His mother was tattooed, and she had a tic that one would get like one was on meth. And yet, because he's white, he has privilege. The toddler who does not have privilege and who is being oppressed is my granddaughter. She is bilingual at age 4. She can read simple books. She has both parents in the house, and she has grandparents on both sides who are active in her life. She has a huge yard and a huge house. When she comes over to my house, she has a playground, a playhouse, a sandbox, and an entire set of toys. Yet she is considered underprivileged because she is a minority. All of this social justice baloney is just that. It's baloney. My mother, God rest her soul, was raised in abject poverty. She told me that they had basically a one-room house that wasn't even sided or finished. It was just tar paper on the outside, outhouse. And she had to share the house with her mother and her brother because her father had died in a fire. And she was raised in abject poverty. And I listened to her stories. She didn't have privilege. Not at all. So anyways, all this social justice stuff, I just want to throw out and burn it. Does not need to be anywhere in our society. When you take a look at what our society was like a year ago, before COVID hit, before the Marxists used COVID and parlayed it and leveraged it to destroy our society, Black people in America had the lowest unemployment rate ever on record for Blacks in America. The average income for Blacks in the 5 largest cities, the 5 cities with the largest Black population, the average income had risen in those cities for those Black people between 5 and 21%. Think about that for a moment. Does that sound like racial oppression to you? Oh, but Daniel, maybe their wages weren't growing as fast as white people. Maybe, and maybe not. You haven't shown me those things yet. Those people were on the up. Blacks got more votes, voted more for Trump than any other Republican has ever received in the last 50 years. Why do you think that happened? Do you think Trump was oppressing Blacks? Why would they vote for him? I think he got 30%, 38% approval rating among Blacks. Some over 40. All of this social justice crap is just that. Okay, let's move on to this guy who's being drilled, and I use that with a kind of a tongue-in-cheek, to be the next Attorney General. This his name is Merrick Garland. You may recall his name because this guy named Barack Obama wanted to nominate Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. And thankfully, the Senate said no. Well, now that the the Democrats now have control of the White House and the Senate and the House of Representatives, Merrick Garland's name is back in the news. And he's being proposed to be the next Attorney General of the United States. During his testimony before the Senate for approval to be the AG, Merrick Garland said during his hearing on Monday, which would be their day, he does not place Antifa attacks on federal buildings on the same level as January 6th attacks on the Capitol. He does not classify it as domestic terrorism because the former attacks occurred at night when the facilities were not in operation. Mm-hmm. Did you see the violence, the burning, the looting, the smashing of windows was not that? And let's read on a little bit. he was asked, do you regard the assaults on federal courthouses and other federal property acts of domestic extremism or domestic terrorism? And he said, well, Senator, to my own definition, which is about the same as the statutory definition, violence or threats of violence in an attempt to disrupt the democratic processes is terrorism. So an attack on a courthouse while in operation, trying to prevent judges from actually deciding cases, that's domestic extremism and domestic terrorism. An attack simply on government property at night or any other kind of circumstances is a clear crime and a serious one, but not domestic terrorism. Well, maybe he was ignorant. There's no doubt. He was ignorant of the facts because there were people inside those buildings when those attacks were occurring. He neglected the fact that while the leftist attacks on federal buildings occurred at night, they were not victimless crimes. In some cases, there were federal employees trapped inside those buildings. I refer you back to Representative Green. Those people were trapped inside those buildings. If they came out, they would have been seriously injured. In other cases, the Antifa and the Black Lives Matter rioters attacked local police and federal officers with explosives, lasers in their eyes, projectiles, and other harmful devices. In some cases, supposed journalists have even provided cover for the rioters as they attacked law enforcement. Over 200 federal officers were injured in Portland alone. So, although Garland cited the domestic terrorism statute to make his case, the definition of domestic terrorism contained therein does not state that only acts occurring during business hours qualify as domestic terrorism. And yet this guy now is going to probably be our next attorney general. If you ask me, that's scary as hell. Have no reason for this guy to be in our federal government. By the way, little side note, our Democrats, even the Democrats in our House of Representatives, are a little bit concerned about the guy sitting in the Oval Office. You might say they know that the lights are on, but nobody's home. They have dozens of Democrats, not Republicans, Democrats, have sent the letter to Joe Biden asking that he would relinquish sole authority to launch nuclear weapons. Not a good look, Democrats. Maybe a little bit of buyer's remorse, paying attention to what's going on there. All right, well, we've kind of run to the end of my stack of stuff. I am thankful that you guys tuned in. And yes, Amelia, I do think he's an idiot. I would agree with you. We have some dangerous people starting to pull and steer the ship. And I'm not too hopeful that these people who are allegedly in charge are going to do the wise things for the benefit of our country. And with that, I will say that if you'd like to get a hold of me, like I said, if you have any other stories that you'd like me to cover, feel free to get a hold of me. You can leave them in the show notes down below and on this. Anytime you can do that. You can also find me on social media, which is on Facebook, facebook.com/New Book of Daniel. You can go to Gab. You can go to MeWe. I'm on those platforms. I will be opening a Clout Hub channel soon. That's the plan. And if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe if you've not done that before. Just click that red subscribe button, and the little bell will show you be exposed. A little bell means, hey, notify me next time Daniel's coming live, or if I upload a new video, then you get a little notification with that. And then you can follow my political thoughts over on uncoverdc.com. And like I said, I just finished an article today on what I call the Civil War, and 5 things that we need to do to help mitigate the Civil War. It's actually going to be a 2-part column, and it's kind of overlapping. I wrote a column on Dr. Zelenko, who came up with the HCQ, the hydroxychloroquine, the Zelenko protocol. That's going to be a 2-parter, but I got sidetracked and I needed to finish this other piece. Needed to get it out of my brain. It was just eating away at me. So I wrote that past couple of days. So I will probably either do that one next and then follow up with the Zelenko part 2, or I might do Zelenko and then who knows what. But keep an eye on what I'm writing over at Uncover DC. And if you've not subscribed over there, you might want to do that too. When you're over at Uncover DC, every evening, we send out an email with all the news stories that have been published on the website that day. So even if you forget to go there during the day and see what's going on, you will get the email, and then you can click the stories that you want to read. So with that, I want to thank you again for tuning in to the New Book of Daniel podcast. My name is Daniel Bobinski, and I thank you so much for listening. I will catch you on the next show. Until then, stay warm, be blessed, and let me know how things are going in your part of the country by contacting me. Let me know what I should talk about. Oh, by the way, one more thing. Watch me on the Alan Key Show. Catch me on Talking with Alan on imtv.us on Mondays at 2 o'clock Eastern and Wednesdays at 4 o'clock Eastern. So on Mondays, I'm a guest, and Alan and I are talking about things. And then on Wednesdays, I host my own show. So tomorrow or today, whenever you're watching this, I will be on Alan Key's. So feel free. Check it out. You can go to imtv.com, or you can go to live.brighteon.com and watch there too. So with that, we'll catch you guys later. Be blessed.